have more than 40 years in animation industry. And
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, how do you keep all the passion? Is it the same passion that you had in the beginning, and how do you keep it?
Well, I think I am as passionate as I was in the beginning because it may be part of the fact that, even though I was at Disney for 40 years, there's a big conversation going on over there, but I don't know if you hear it. Anyway, even though I was there for 40 years, I did 7 feature films with Ron Clements, but even those 40 years, so it still took 3, 4, and 5 years. So I feel like I don't, in a way, it's a big body of work, and in a way, I haven't done that many films. So I still feel excited about the projects that, the personal projects I'm doing, and even the new animations I see from other studios. I really like to see exciting work from young artists, and now I'm traveling the festival circuit with my film, and I'm seeing short films done by other people, and that's fun to see too, to get a different slant on things. So yeah, so I feel like it's not hard to still feel passionate about animation. It's really, I think, one of the most amazing art forms. So I still am smitten with animation. Yeah.
Well, and you were saying that you've been traveling for a lot of festivals right now, and I wanted to ask you, in all this time, how do you think that animation has changed, and not only in the stories, but also in technique and also perception from the audience?
Well, I mean, it's evolved a lot from when we started at Disney. When Ron and I were starting at Disney in the mid-'70s, animation, there was only one studio doing feature animation at that time. It was Disney. No one else was doing it. So that's changed hugely. Now there's a number of studios that are doing animation. And there was, I would say, when we started, there was a stigma with animation that it was only for children, at least the animation done in the theaters. Even the Disney films, that some people thought these are babysitting movies. You drop children off at the movie and then the adults leave. But we tried to make movies that would appeal to adults as well as children, and that it would work for all audiences, which is really what Walt Disney was doing when he made his films in the 40s. He didn't think of them as kids' movies. He thought of them as general audience movies. So, but it had gotten away from that. So we really were trying to get the idea back in there that we could make a movie that appealed to an adult as well as a child. We wouldn't exclude children, but we would include adults. So that was one of the things. Obviously, the techniques have changed considerably. The movies we did were hand-drawn, but even within the hand-drawn films, we introduced the use of computer elements, like in Great Mouse Detective, we had Big Ben and the clock, we had gears that were done in CG. And, in Aladdin, we had the Cave of Wonders that we built in a computer, and the magic carpet we texture mapped, so we used a technique that they couldn't have done in the 40s. So it was really using the technology of the day. So each film, we try to look for ways to use the technology to tell the story more effectively. And obviously then it moved to CG, and with all the advances that Pixar made and all that, where they really found ways, the early CG looked bad and you couldn't do humans. And then over a series of years in several films, you could do humans, and they're amazing to see, The Incredibles and things like that, where the humans are cartoony and yet very convincing. And so there continued to be progress made like that. Now there are films even like the Spider-Verse, where they're doing a mashup of styles, where they've got CG, but they make it look like 2D, or they incorporate 2D elements to give a different look, or even, the way they did the most recent film, where they art directed each different multiverse to have its own style that took advantage of drawing techniques. And that, I think that's a great use of the medium, to really exploit the fact that it's animation, and you can use that to help tell the story. They're all techniques to tell the story. The essential part, I think, is not different. You were trying to create interesting worlds that we want to spend time in. You're trying to tell stories that are compelling, that you feel like there are real stakes involved, and you're trying to create characters that have appeal, and that the audience, and they have some charisma that pulls the audience in, and that the issues of the movie are things that people can relate to in their daily lives, whatever it might be, whether or not it's their relationship with a parent or a child, or the world, or nature, or opposition, identity, all these basic human issues that have informed art since the beginning of time. It's not really different. So I think it's going to continue to be that people like to have stories told to them, and they like to tell stories. I think both of those impulses haven't changed. The tools to do those have changed and will continue to change, but the essential heart of it, I think, hasn't changed.
And well, there are a lot of questions I want to ask you, but
Yeah,
I think one of the most important would be, I remember John Lasseter once said that maybe
yeah,
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the only 30s film that generated the same passion from today audiences that it did in the first, when it released. So in your case, I think it's the same thing with Aladdin, with the Little Mermaid. Just
yeah, yeah.
so, how do you feel to have created such beloved classics?
Well, when we worked on them, we weren't sure they were going to be beloved classics. We made the movies for ourselves as the audience, and we hoped other people would like them as well as we did. And we didn't know, even when we had finished Little Mermaid, our boss Peter Schneider, I think, had shown Little Mermaid to Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg predicted it would make $100 million, and no animated film at that time had made anywhere close to $100 million. And we're like, really? Do you think he thinks that? And it did wind up making that kind of money, and way beyond that when you add all the re-releases and the videos and the merchandising and all that stuff. But you don't know when you're making a film if it's going to work. It takes you 3, 4, or 5 years, and you're not really showing it publicly for the majority of that time. And it's a very scary time when you finally preview the movie to a public audience and you get their verdict. At least initially, it's unfinished, but you get a sense of, did it work for them or not? And you have a little bit of time to make adjustments. But obviously, it's a thrill. It was a funny thing for us because when we were going to CalArts, I didn't ever get to Disneyland until I was in my 20s when I was at CalArts. And I went to Disneyland with John Lasseter and with some of my fellow student classmates of CalArts where we were studying animation. And John Lasseter's girlfriend at the time, her name was Sally Newton, we were sitting there eating lunch with her, and she said, just think, someday this park is going to be full of characters that you guys create. And I was like, nah, I just didn't, it was hard to imagine, but she was right. I mean, those parks are full of characters that we created, and it's thrilling to have them, new generation, people, a little girl came up to me today, a little Italian girl who loves The Little Mermaid. Obviously, she was born, 30 years after we made the movie, and yet she relates to the character, relates to the story. That's really thrilling, and we had no idea if that would happen or not.
There are a lot of people who talk about Disney ages. They talk about the golden era, the silver era. But
Yeah.
In your case, how would you define your eras? How would be John Musker's eras?
I don't know. I mean, there were regime changes while I was at Disney since I was there for 40 years. So the earliest regime was still the 9 old men, where some of them were still there. And Ron Miller was in charge of the studio, who was Disney's son-in-law. And so that was sort of one era in a way. And then when he left and Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg came in, Michael Eisner was sort of there for 10 years, and that was another era. But then he left, and then there was sort of the Pixar era when John Lasseter was in charge, my old CalArts classmate. And again, that was another 10 years sort of. And now they're into a new post-John Lasseter phase. I retired just as John was leaving the studio, sort of. So I'm not familiar with the current phase, but I think it's going to continue to evolve. It's sort of cyclical, and it has its ups, has its downs. It isn't always a straight line. It varies, and that's just the nature of the business, I think.
What would you say is your peak?
My peak? Oh, it's coming, of course. No, I don't know. I mean, it's weird because in some ways, Moana, or Oceania, as it's called here in Italy, I guess, or Baiana, perhaps as it may be called in Spain. I just read the other day that for streaming movies last year, all the movies that streamed, live action, animation, Moana, there were more minutes of Moana watched last year than any other movie. There were 11 billion minutes watched. So in a way, because of all that streaming, I feel like that Moana in its own way, or Baiana or Oceania, it perhaps has made a bigger impact worldwide maybe than any of our other movies. But they've, obviously Little Mermaid was a huge success, and generations have followed that. So it's hard for me. I'm too close to the material to say this is my peak. That's for other people to evaluate. I think I can't really say that.
Well, animation, of course, has lived a lot of great moments, also difficult ones. right now there's a lot of uncertainty related with artificial intelligence. What would you
Right.
say
Yeah.
to all the people who is worried, the young artists who are worried about this?
Well, I don't think their worry is entirely misplaced because it's new. But then again, there were big worries when photography came in, when artists worked and suddenly there were photographs. Could you still make a painting and could it work? And you could, but it did change things. So magazines, for example, used to be full of illustrations and then they became full of photographs and there weren't as many illustrations. And the same with forms like radio drama. There was radio drama and then they really kind of stopped making radio drama and it moved to television. There were silent films and they became talkies. So it's part of the process, I think. So I would hope that AI would be one of those things that it's going to take a while to sort of figure out how best to use it. I hope it can be used by artists as a tool and not something that eliminates jobs or somehow, weakens the art form in some way. I don't think it's clear yet which way it's going to go, because I think if you're a young artist and you're, say, like a visual development artist, now with AI, you can give a prompt, I want to see a castle that looks Gothic and has whatever. You can give your prompts and it'll spit something out of you that's regurgitated from other things. And normally you might have said that to an artist, show me a castle, and now suddenly you've got an AI image of that. I hope that the people in the creative world can discern the difference between pastiches of other things and original statements by new artists, or find ways to use AI that can give them results that can simplify certain parts of the animation process, but not, have people lose jobs and lose creativity. But it's in process right now. It hasn't resolved yet, I think.
Also about the techniques that we were talking earlier, it's obvious that Disney was the reigning champion of 2D, and then there was a period with 3D, and now, it was said that 2D would disappear. It was also said with stop motion. What do you think will be the future of 3D, of 2D, of stop motion, of animation, of all the techniques?
I mean, I hope that all the techniques continue. They all have their different challenges, and Hollywood is a very herd mentality place. So if there's a stop motion movie that comes out that doesn't do well, then all the stop motion films are kind of hurt for a while because studios don't want to invest money because they think, audiences won't go. But really, it might have just been that one particular movie that didn't work for some reason, or the marketing wasn't very good or whatever. So I think there's a future for CG. I think there's a future for stop motion. And I think in some ways 2D is the most challenged. There's a lot of 2D on television, but in theaters, less so. I'm hoping that the filmmakers can find ways to tell stories that are compelling enough that will use 2D and get people in the theaters to watch them. But that is in the hands of young artists, I think, who have to find ways to find stories to tell that move people enough that they want to go see them, and that's not a science, it's an art, so you can't formularize it. It has to be very organic and subjective.
Also, I don't know how familiar you are with Ibero-American animation, Spain, Portugal, Latin American, but there have been very important efforts in the last year. The last one was Robot Dreams, of course, to create an industry. Maybe American industry, Hollywood industry is very difficult, but how do you think that we may achieve, I don't know, for example, to be at the level of France, of Japan? What recommendation would you give us?
I mean, I don't know exactly, except I know it seems like more and more governments are giving some tax incentives to encourage production. I was just, in the Canary Islands a few weeks ago at Animación and Damien Pereira's festival there. And they certainly are doing all sorts of things, it seems like, to encourage business to come to the Canary Islands to help produce their films, to source it to them. So I think there's going to be more and more of that in Europe and in Asia. And I hope it's successful and that it can be, production can be shared in studios around the world. Even now, Skydance Animation, based in Los Angeles, but they're using Madrid's studio, is now their their base of all their animation. I think we may see more and more things like that, with even American companies using, places outside of America, whether or not in Europe or in Latin America or in Asia, and hopefully on quality films, not just to save money, but to make use of the great talents that are in these other places.
And as a last question, of course, in the last year, we've heard a lot of artists claiming that animation is an art form, but it's not a recent fight. It's a fight that it's been taking place for a lot of years. How far do you think we are that the audiences effectively think of animation as a real art form?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly. I do think generally the audience looks to animation to tell a story, and telling a story is an art, but the methods, the techniques, those are evolving and changing. I think the audience doesn't go to it. I don't think they really go to it, to a film, to say, I want to see. I think they do like novelty, and I want to see something I've never seen before. But I think they also, John Lester talked about this years ago, that he got this from his brother, who was a designer, where he was saying there's sort of a sweet spot. Like if you do something that's entirely novel and new, the audience may reject that. But if you do something entirely familiar, and I've seen it before, they can reject that too. So the sweet spot in some ways that he felt was there is a successful project or film needs to have both. It needs to have novelty, things you've never seen before, but it also has to have something familiar to latch onto, or to have an anchor, so you're not sort of bewildered by what you're looking at. There's some kind of structure or anchor to it. So I think that's a good method to sort of look to in the future still, is what can we do that's new, and what can we do that is sort of reassuring? Where do you find the balance between those two poles?
Yeah,